Hello and welcome to Focus. Today we see how the Chinese village of Wukan has become an example for pro-democracy activists across the communist country. 3 months ago, it ousted local officials because of perceived corruption and, in a surprise move, won the right to elections as part of a deal to end unrest there. Those elections were held over the weekend, causing a media stir, and turnout was high. But is this poll in southern Guangdong nothing new, as the provincial party chief has said, or might it really be the start of widespread political reform? Our team on the ground went to find out.
The national anthem and the flag still belong to communist China. But these makeshift voting booths, surrounded by journalists from around the world, are here for the first time. The organizers of local elections in Wukan kept their promise. They made the voting process transparent and fair.
We asked the monitors to now seal the ballot boxes.
Saturday morning, the village discovers grassroots democracy. Despite some passionate debate about which candidate to support, it's a peaceful day. 80% of eligible voters have come to elect their new village committee leaders. It's a first for Mr. Zhou, who is 67 years old. He doesn't know to keep his ballot secret.
Here I wrote down the name of the people I want to vote for. I hope this election will be a great success and give the people here renewed happiness.
Mr. Zhou is happier than when we met him 3 months ago, behind a barricade. At that time, Wukan was completely cut off from the outside world. After several weeks of standoff, China's ruling Communist Party decided to diffuse local anger through firing the 42-year village chief. Villagers ended decades of abuse of power and election fraud that are common in many Chinese villages.
Before, there weren't really elections. The head of the village just put the names of people he wanted into a box.
News of the protesters' victory has spread throughout China. Today in village streets, you can find people from neighboring provinces talking about their problems with journalists, or Chinese college students researching the Wukan effect.
We arrived 10 days ago. We want to understand what's going on and to study how they've broadcast the events here to the outside world.
Reformers want to use Wukan as a template. And that's what officials from Beijing fear most. They first tried to censor news of the protest, and then they chose to use it as part of government propaganda. The leader of the protest, who inspired the villagers 3 months ago, was appointed head of the local Communist Party committee. When we asked him if the Wukan election should spread to other parts of China, he chose his words carefully.
The way Wukan's crisis is being resolved is specific to its problems. I don't think the same model can be applied outside of Wukan.
According to experts, the peaceful resolution of Wukan's rebellion is due in part to geography. Guangdong province is open to the outside world and near Hong Kong. It's one of the most liberal provinces in China.
In some other provinces that are more backward, that are poorer, and where the peasants lack organizing power, and where there is not a middle class to sort of defend the interests of the peasants, then you will have some bloodshed.
Over the last several weeks, many villages have tried to copy Wukan's standoff with limited success. We tried to reach one of them on China's east coast, but we were followed by this official car, bumped from behind, and then attacked by local thugs. Free and transparent local elections have not made their way out of Wukan, and the village still stands alone as an example of grassroots democracy in China.
And Shannon Van Sant, who worked on that report, joins me now from Beijing. Hello, Shannon. Now, has Wukan really become an example of democracy in China, or is it just good crisis management by the authorities?
Well, it is good crisis management. The authorities did what they had to do to stop the protesters and stop the local rebellion, but it has become a benchmark for transparency, and it's significant in that regard. I think that what you need to look at is that these village committees, the village committee that was elected there, it doesn't necessarily have a lot of political power. That committee, the elections are not meaningful in that sense, but it is a benchmark for free and transparent local elections. And it's worth noting that even the people who are running in the election in Wukan faced intimidation by officials from neighboring local villages. So there were still a lot of problems there with the local election in terms of intimidation, and it's an example of fair and transparent democracy, but it still has a long way to go, even in Wukan.
Now, the trouble there started over what residents said was a land grab by village officials, and land disputes generally have become a massive headache for the leadership, haven't they?
That's right. Land disputes are a leading cause of social unrest in China. In 2010, 180,000 public protests were recorded. 65% of those had to do with land seizures. I've reported on land seizure protests here in Beijing. The protests I've reported on here, the government officials and the real estate developers have hired local thugs also to beat the local protesters who are protesting about their land being seized. And a lot of this is driven by just a huge property boom. There's a tremendous amount of money right now that's being made, especially on the local government level, by real estate development, by a tremendous amount of investment in construction, in luxury high-rises, and all sorts of real estate development. And especially in the rural areas, this land is being taken away from farmers and from villagers, and these villagers are not being adequately compensated. So this is something you hear about in many parts of China, people telling you about their land seizures, their land being taken away. There isn't an independent judicial system. There's not rule of law. So there's no real way for them to address these compensation issues other than to protest like they did in Wukan.
So we've seen mass protests in other parts of China, in parts outside of Wukan, but for now it stands alone, as you say in the report. Are there signs, though, that we'll see another Wukan and more free and fair local elections?
Right now, it stands as an isolated example. I think what you're seeing across China is you're seeing in some instances a response, a velvet glove response, and in some instances an iron fist response to public protest. In some parts of China, that you have local government officials, as you did in Guangdong province in Wukan, where the government officials respond in a progressive way. In other parts of China, they respond with incredible repressive measures by beating the protesters, by sometimes beating them to death, by closing the villages off from outside media. So you're seeing both. But I think what's important about Wukan is that it's a harbinger of things to come. It's an example of the ways in which China is moving forward. You see examples of ways in which China is moving forward and democratizing in many parts of the country, but you also see examples of fierce authoritarian repressiveness in many parts of the country. So it's moving forwards in some ways, it's moving back, but in general, I think in China you're seeing Wukan as a sign of a greater progressiveness, a more potential for change across the country.
Now, briefly, you mentioned the property boom that's exacerbating tensions between rich and poor. How has it changed the mindset of the average Chinese villager?
Well, basically this idea of individualism, of democracy, has really taken hold in many parts of China. I mean, since 1979, when China started opening up, this idea of individualism has really spread. And so people here across the country, when you talk to villagers, they can tell you that they'll talk to you about truth, about standing up for their rights. So I think this idea is really spreading in terms of individual freedom and rights.
Shannon Van Sant, thank you very much for that, and thank you for watching. That's it for Focus. Do stay tuned to France24.